Welcome to Better Bangla, your host Ripon on this weekly show on Your Money Matters. Yes, your money, your matters. Today we are going to be talking about one of the most important subjects for those who work for themselves. But the question is, what is it? Yes, the topic today is about being self-employed, and to help you and to support you, we have guests for you who is going to be guiding you through the process. But let me tell you what you'll be getting. Today we are going to be talking about being self-employed. Today we are going to be covering about issues that are affecting you when it comes to bailiff enforcement. And of course, I do want you to go with a sweet smile. And for that, you'll also be getting tips on how to get the best offer, or if things go wrong on holiday, how do you deal with your travel agents and your flights and planes. So all those things combined, this is what we are going to be talking about. But of course, today's main topic, it is going to be self-employment. And if you want to engage with me or my guests, phone in 0207 791 5170, 0207 791 5170. Today, again, it is about self-employment, and the reason the topic has become so important is because, according to National of Statistics, Office of National Statistics, in 2017, or if you compare the stats from 2011 to 2017, we have seen over 12% in rise in self-employment in British economy. But the real question is why? Why has there been such an increase? Why do we go for self-employment? What are the consequences of going self-employed, the negative and positive? To help us, we have a guest for you who is James Farrar, chair of one of the biggest private hire workers union. James Farrar, please do introduce yourself.
Oh, good evening. Thanks for having me on. My name is James Farrar. I'm chair of the minicab drivers branch of the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain. So our trade union is the de facto trade union in Britain today for independent workers. So we represent not only minicab drivers, but also couriers like delivery riders, foster care workers, cleaners, security guards, people like that who are tend to be classified as independent workers. They're in business, but they're not necessarily in business on their own account. They're part of somebody else's business, and we specialize in supporting them with our trade union.
So, I mean, in terms of being part of a business or being a business, define me the terms of being self-employed.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because this has become a controversial topic, or especially over the last year or so with the gig economy. Many ways, it's a kind of a fake debate. It's old wine in new bottles, if you like. To boil it down simply, in Britain today, there are three categories. There is employed. I'm working for this radio station. I've got a pension. I've got a 9-to-5 job. I've got full employment rights. I've got sick leave. I've got all sorts of rights that you would typically associate with typical standard employment. PAYE is deducted by the employer. National insurance contributions are made by the employer, and so on. That's full employment. I think we can all understand that. And then there's true self-employment. So I may be working for myself. I could be a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker. I could be running a restaurant, a cafe. I could be running a garage. And I'm in business on my own account. I know who my customers are. I'm in charge. I decide if I'm going to work today. I decide how much my prices should be. I know who my customers are, and so on. I'm in full control over that business. That's true self-employment. Now, in the middle, there's this category called worker, limby worker. Now that means, okay, so I'm in business. I'm self-employed, but I don't really have full control over everything that's going on. So I'm not setting the price. So a lot of minicab drivers are in this situation, right? And I'm one also. I took a case against Uber on these grounds personally. But I'm not setting the fare. I don't know who the customer is. I may be following an app that tells me the route that I need to follow. For all of those reasons, look, I am self-employed in the sense that, look, I own the car. I are filing tax returns. I've got tax deductions and so on.
Yeah.
But I am, in effect, part of somebody else's business. So for Uber drivers, I'm part of Uber's business. Or for Addison Lee driver, part of Addison Lee's business. Or if I'm working for Keen Group, their minicab company, I'm part of their business, even though I'm self-employed. If you fall in that category, you have some additional rights. So you have the right to make sure that you earn at least the minimum wage for every hour that you're available for work. You've got the right to holiday pay. So up to
That's
25
only
days.
when you're a worker, is that right?
That's when you're a worker. And also you've got some other basic protections. You've got the right not to be discriminated against, and that's awfully important. Where there is discrimination, maybe on the grounds of race or religion, that you have those protections and that you look after those protections. And you've got the right to be protected as a whistleblower. If you see something going wrong at work and you let the government know or you let the regulator know, then you should be protected. You shouldn't lose your job for that. So those are some of the basic protections. And they're really important. This middle ground is really important because if you think about it, if I don't have the benefits and protections of employment, but I don't have the freedom to really run my own business, if I'm not careful, I could be exploited in that middle ground. So it's really important that we have these protections and we look after them. And it's very important for minicab drivers, couriers, people who are delivering food for Deliveroo and so on, that to understand that you have those rights and you should look after them.
So obviously you've explored when there are confusion may arise between worker, self-employed and employee. But of course, when you become self-employed, what are the burdens that you get with it, with that title?
Well, I mean, you are essentially bearing a lot of the risk for the business that you're in. So if you're a minicab driver, you're making the decision to finance a vehicle. You could be locked into that. You are taking the risk, the market risk. Is the work going to be there if I finance this vehicle and go out to work for Uber or for somebody else? What else could I be doing in that time? Could I have an opportunity to earn better money doing something else? That's what we call opportunity cost. I also carry the regulatory burden. Yeah,
That's more.
Yeah, if I don't do my job properly, I could find myself facing legal action from Transport for London, for example. So you're carrying a lot of the financial risk, the operational risk, the regulatory risk of the business when you're self-employed. And it's important to remember that you carry that responsibility. And with that responsibility, you should be paid a little bit better for that as well.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. But in terms of if you violate those rules, what happens?
Well, one of the interesting things about being a minicab driver, for example, is that you can find yourself facing criminal enforcement of licensing law. I always think it's a curious thing that here we are, we're in the city of London, aren't we, in Tower Hamlets. And I could go down to one end of the street and be a banker, and I could rob and plunder the world, and at the end of it, they'd probably give me a knighthood. But if I'm a minicab driver in the City of London, if I don't do it right, I could end up with a criminal record. So, for example, if you don't pick up a disabled passenger, or there's some confusion about picking up a disabled passenger, maybe you didn't know the person was disabled, maybe you never even reached them, you cancelled the job. Well, Transport for London can come after you for that, and it has happened to some of our members. One particular member went out to pick up somebody. He never even saw the passenger, and he now faces a date in the magistrate's court with the charge that he is in criminal violation of the 2010 Equality Act for not picking up a disabled passenger. So these are the things you need to be careful about. There's criminal enforcement of these licensing terms, and it's the driver that's bearing that responsibility rather than the operator.
So how about the expense then? Clearly, the show is about money. So if you're self-employed, yes, you're getting the income. So how do you work out the expenses, the money that you have to take into account in terms of taxation?
Well, I mean, the first thing is to make some profit before you before you can to worry too much about taxation. I think the thing is what a lot of drivers don't understand. We're all guilty of this, myself included. Is that we assume sometimes we're making money, but then once we do the sums, we find out we're not necessarily. So sometimes we can be actually living on what we call depreciation of the vehicle. Now, by the time we talk all the true costs into account, the work we're doing may not be as profitable as we like to think it is, and so we end up living in a kind of hand-to-mouth situation where we don't quite understand that. Look, although I brought some cash home at the end of the week, the big picture shows that I'm not really making money. That's something that we have to be extremely careful about. On the other hand, it's very important to keep good records of what you're doing, so that you understand when you're making money, when you're not. But also, when it comes to taxes, that you're making sure you're recording all your expenses, because your income will be recorded very well by your operator. It's up to you to keep track of all your expenses, all your relevant expenses. And one of the things that people don't necessarily realize, that you can actually write off trade union membership as an expense.
Oh wow!
So joining our union for £8 a month, you can write that off against your taxes.
Well, if you want to flaunt off the union that you're part of, feel free to do so. But in terms of expenses and the car, where does the car fit in, the car expenses? Because I understand that car expenses is a huge one for taxi drivers.
So a lot of drivers are either renting from a PCO rental firm on a monthly or quarterly basis, or other drivers own their own vehicles and depreciate it. Some of the hidden costs with renting from some of the PCO rental firms is that you put down a deposit, and a lot of the members come to us with complaints that some of these rental firms have been unfair about not giving back that deposit. They come and say, "Oh, there's a scratch, or there's something." Make up some reason why they need to take some of the deposit back. I suppose it's not that different from what we see in the housing rental market as well.
So do you mean the deposit that you pay when you enter into a hire purchase agreement?
Exactly. Well, it's not even a hire purchase agreement. It's just a straight rental. I can rent the vehicle on a monthly or a quarterly basis.
Okay.
I put down £500, and then when I bring back the vehicle, lo and behold, some sort of injury to the car is spotted that was never spotted before, and I'm out £500. That's an old trick. I mean, it's probably something we're used to in the housing rental market. But that's one thing that drivers need to be careful about. And also, sometimes a tough letter from your trade union representative can make some of those problems go away. Because sometimes it's a case of some of these bad actors who are trying it on. And if they think they can get away with getting £500 from you, they'll do that. But when we work together, as a trade association, support one another, we can make that type of behaviour transparent and hopefully make it go away.
I mean, obviously you talked about collectivism and working together. So moving towards that in the context of your case, what was the bulk of your argument in the tribunal, and following on from that, what was the outcome and where is it now?
Well, look, the case for me started with an assault actually very close to where we're sitting right now. I was assaulted and believe it or not, racially abused as an Irish person. and I reported it to the police, and the police said, well, look, we'll investigate this. And I did it actually to protect myself, and I would advise every driver to do that. If you've been the victim of anything, any type of verbal abuse or physical abuse, you must report it to the police. Even if you just dialed a non-emergency number, what is that, 112, I think it is? Use that number, register it, because it's very important for the police to collect these records on what's happening. And I reported, and so the police wanted to know, well, who's your customer?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't know who my customer is. Uber never told me. And then the police asked me to ask Uber, and I did, and they said, well, we can't give the data to you. It's our data. Eventually, they wasted 10 weeks of the police's time in finding this person. And that's when I began to think, well, where's the responsibility? Where's the duty of care here? And then at the same time, I started looking at my income.
Yeah.
And I realized that I wasn't making any more than £5 an hour at this. I worked out my expenses and my income in great detail.
Yeah.
And I wasn't making any more than £5 an hour. And at the time, people were saying, that's crazy, you're doing it wrong, you're doing the job wrong. But then recently, Uber published top driver income. And when you work that out, top driver income, they said drivers earning £18 an hour, working 48 hours a week. Now, if you work that down, you take 25% commission off.
Yeah.
You take off 250, 270 for the vehicle, £100 for fuel. You're in the territory of £5 an hour as well. So that's when I realized, oh, okay, there's a problem here. Structurally, I can't, no matter what I do, this game is rigged. I can't make more than £5 an hour at this game. So we started talking to our lawyers about this, particularly first on the safety bit and then on the income bit. And what they said was, well, look, firstly, they say they've got no duty of care to you because you're the principal in the business, they say, and they're just your agent, and you're on your own, pal. But they said, under UK law, we think you're classified as a worker. And that means that I am entitled to earn the minimum wage for every hour on the job.
Yeah.
And so we went to court and we won that. We won that 2 years ago now. Unfortunately, Uber have been appealing it. So they will drag it out in the courts for a few years. But we will prevail in the long run. In fact, it's a similar case. Just finished a 7-year journey through to the Supreme Court last week, Pimlico Plumbers, and they prevailed. The plumbers prevailed also, that they're workers. So it's quite clear now in law that we have these rights and we have to look after them.
And why is that important to you that you win this case?
Well, it's more important for all of us as a collective. Everything we do in a trade union, we think about the collective, what's good for the collective. And the reason why it's so important is because if Uber is allowed to divorce itself from all the operating cost and responsibility of the business, then it's free to drive prices down because its game is to expand the market as fully as possible, to get as many drivers onto the road. And in order for Uber to give a really good, reliable service to consumers, for example, to get you a car within 2 minutes, the only way you can really do that is to have an oversupply of people.
Yeah.
Now, those oversupply of people, that means also that you're not earning enough because you're not working enough, and when you are working, the prices are too low for you to make a living. And so, if we can prevail in the long run with this argument that we're entitled to at least the minimum wage for every hour we're working, and goodness knows we all aspire to earn a lot more than the minimum wage, but that would become the floor in the market. And we say to Uber, look, if you don't have enough work for these guys to cross the minimum wage threshold, you need to make up the difference. And that's already the law in Vancouver in Canada. So drivers that there are self-employed, they can, the sky's the limit to what you can earn, but if you don't earn it, the operator has to top you up. And that's the way it can be and should be and will be in London also. And that's really important for minicab drivers because it means that this race to the bottom, the oversupply of the market, we can put a limit on it, and then that will float everybody's boat up.
Absolutely. On that note, James, let us listen to also what members of the public think about the topic, what is being self-employed and what does it mean to them.
Being self-employed means that people say you are your own boss, which means that you don't work for somebody, you work for yourself, but you're actually working for your client. And so what it really means is instead of having usually like a 9 to 5 job, working Monday to Friday for somebody else, you're working depending on when the work comes in. And so it really depends. For some people it works well because if you've got work you enjoy doing and you have flexibility of when you want to work, how much holiday you take, those are real advantages and that's good. But on the other hand, you don't have the security of regular work, You might say, oh, I'll work when the work happens, but that might mean doing very long hours sometimes, and never having a holiday. And of course your holidays aren't paid for, nor is your sick leave, nor is your pension, nor are your, any of those other kind of benefits. Those you have to pay for yourself. And so you ought to really be earning more money if you're self-employed in order to have an equal standard of living somebody who is employed.
Providing for yourself, not depending on the government, sorting out work for yourself, doing things that you do not necessarily have to depend on the government. For instance, wages, you pay your own wages, you do your own things the way you want it to do. And by that you will help the government because you will be employing some other personnel onto your own organization. And it's very good because you're going to be self-reliant, you're not going to depend on government income, you're not going to depend on anybody's income, you're going to work for yourself, you're going to provide job for yourself, and you will be able to put your back into the community to help the community. So that is why it's a very good idea. And it shows economic growth. Countries where you have a lot of self-employed organizations, you find out that there are a lot of economic progress, such as in America. Most of their economic growth is dependent on most of these self-employed organizations. That is why they go into privatization. That's the essence of privatization. They want to once privatize, that means it's no more in the hands of the government. They're taking a lot of responsibility out and now put pieces of being reserved or corporate organizations that will then do things the way it's supposed to be done.
Well, very good approach. Being self-employed, I think it depends on who you are, what kind of person you are, and what kind of work you're doing, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think for me personally, it wouldn't be a good thing. I don't think I am very good at managing my time in that way. I think I would really struggle to be looking for my next piece of work or doing my last piece of work.
You are in charge of any and all work that you do. You have the responsibility of managing your own employment in terms of what you earn, what work you do, how often you do it, and the type of work. And also you are responsible for any legal aspect of being your own business person, your own owner of your own business. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I guess there's pros and cons because obviously if you're responsible for all aspects of your employment work that you're doing, then you've got to think about the admin side of things, think about the legal side of things, you've got to think about promoting yourself, your business, and you've got to go out there and find either the job or promote your services so others find you. And if you're very good at that, then you'll probably get a lot of work. If you're not, then you might find that you're not earning enough to live on. The positives are that you gain profit from all the work that you do. You control and manage every aspect of your business or role. And some people that's very important because it fits in with different aspects of their life. So it just depends on what your abilities are and what your needs are at the same time.
Being self-employed means that
Well, here we are. We have been listening to the positive and negatives of being self-employed. We've also heard about views of members of the public in terms of what they think. But of course, experience does vary depending upon where you are. And of course, what we've seen from James, things are not as hunky-dory as it seems to be. Having explored the negative and positive, James, tell us the practicalities of accounting from your experience.
Well, I think in practicality from some of the industries that our union serves, on the income side, it's all pretty clear. Your operator, whoever that is, will give you a very clear record of the work you've done and what you've been paid for it. I think after that, it's up to you to make sure that you capture every receipt that you have that's related to you doing that work in any shape or form, and making sure that I would certainly recommend that you don't do this yourself, that you go to an accountant. I think it was the best money I've ever spent, at least, is not trying to do this type of work myself, but paying it to an accountant who will give you the professional advice that you really need to make sure that you're on the right side of things with the HMRC, but that you're also taking advantage of the additional benefits that are available to you.
So, I mean, before we finish off, in terms of self-employment, is there anything else you want to say to the listeners?
Well, I think some of the really good points we heard in those audio clips there. One is that you need to be thinking about your pension. You know, we're all going to get old. You know, we in this industry, particularly when you're self-employed, no matter what you do, if you're self-employed, there is a risk that you don't think and plan ahead enough for the future. So that's really important to think about how you're going to meet your provision. The other thing is you need to think about sickness, illness. How would you cope? How would your family cope? And are you insured properly for that? Should something happen to you? And of course, a death as well. If you were to suddenly lose your life, what would happen to your family, to your loved ones? So I would encourage people who are in self-employment to think very carefully and strategically about how you make money in the short run, but also how you protect yourself in the long run as well.
Well, on that note, James Farrar, thank you for taking part on Your Money Matters show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we have a couple of tweets. We have one tweet from Aslam. We might be, according to him, we might be self-employed. We are being discriminated, abused by everyone regardless. That's one. And we have another one from Nathan. Being self-employed is not easy. Learning about tax is impossible. After paying tax, I'm left with literally nothing. And looks like we seem to be hearing those sort of sounds quite a lot based on our conversation. So on that note, let me take a few minutes break and we will get back to you in a bit.
All right, thank you very much. That was
That's
fun.
okay. I'm just need to kind of develop my own stuff, obviously.
Of course.
But yeah.
Well, I hope that was okay.
That's fantastic.
I'm not expert on the personal finance.
No, thank you.
No,
Thank you. It's your experience that matters. Thank you, James.
Myself up. Thank you.
But then do invite me on your stuff, you know.
Yeah, of course. How are things going with momentum?
Well, it's absorbed by local election, isn't it? And now the AGM is coming.
Yeah.
So that's next
Did you
week.
go to Labour Live?
Oh, I couldn't. But apparently it was fun. It was very fun.
Yeah, everybody was quick to say it was going to be rubbish, but then it was okay in the end.
Yeah, I mean, people seem to have a good time. Everyone went there. They said we loved it.
Good crowds, yeah.
Did you go?
No, I didn't.
Oh, right.
No. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Take care. See you later.
কার্গো সার্ভিস থাকতে আপনি কেন জেএমজিকেই বেছে নিলেন? কারণ জেএমজি কার্গো সার্ভিসে পাইনিয়র, বিলেতের প্রথম কার্গো সার্ভিস যারা বিমানে অ্যাপ্রুভড এবং মালামাল থাকে 100% ইন্স্যুরেন্স দিতে। তাই নাকি? শুধু কি তাই, জেএমজি সপ্তাহে 5টি ফ্লাইটের মাধ্যমে দেশে মালামাল পাঠায়। কাজে দ্রুত এবং উন্নত সেবার গ্যারান্টি থাকে পুরোপুরি। আর কিছু ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়াইড কার্গো সার্ভিস, নিজস্ব প্যাকিং ব্যবস্থা, সপ্তাহে 7 দিন খোলা। বিশ্বস্ততা আর দক্ষতার জন্য জেএমজি সেটি দিন দিন বেড়েই চলেছে। জেএমজি কার্গো, কথায় নয় কাজে বিশ্বাসী। 8 ফোর্ডাম স্ট্রিট, লন্ডন E1, টেলিফোন 020-724-7770।
Welcome to Your Money Matters with Ripon Ray. We've heard earlier from James Farrar the positive and negatives of being self-employed, and of course, we've also heard about how to go about when there are issues to do with tax, and he emphasized on getting hold of an accountant. And of course, now it's time for us to move to our other topic, which is as important, and that is to do with bailiff. So, the question is, what are bailiffs? Why are they there? In what way are they different from debt collection company? And when they do attend your home, how can you respond? What do you do? What rights do you have? Those are some of few things that I'm going to be enlightening you with. So let's start with a bailiff and a few stats. Now, according to Money Advice Trust, between 2016 and 2017, more than 2.3 million debts were passed to bailiffs by 352 local authorities in UK. And that's in contrast to, let's say, 14 and 15, that's over 14% increase once it gets to 2017 and 18. So as we are seeing the increase in use of bailiff by councils, the question is, what are they? How do you deal with them? What rights do you have? Those are things that I want to talk to you about. So to start with, what are bailiffs? Now, there is a misconception that bailiffs can just attend your home without notice or without excuse. But generally speaking, bailiffs attend for a specific purpose. It's always primarily to do with money, unless we're dealing with eviction. Now, in order for bailiff to come to your home, there is an expectation that your case has gone through courts. Now, in your case, it will be either a county court or a magistrate court, or in other civil litigation process in the context of, let's say, penalty charge. But it always goes through courts. Once it has gone through a court, then either the court instructs a bailiff or an individual instructs the courts to bailiff to attend your home. It could be criminal matter, or it could even be civil. So let's say, for example, if you're dealing with a court fine, then obviously it came through as a result of a criminal proceedings, i.e. you haven't, I don't know, public order offense, you were behaving disorderly and police caught you, and then you were taken to court and you pay fine for that offense. Again, once it goes through the court has given an order, and then the court has to use their power to find a way to enforce the order. Again, even through civil or criminal. In the context of civil, we're talking about going to the courts, county court. You could have a loan, credit card, parking penalty charge notices, or sometimes, as we have seen recently, is fuel debts related to gas or electricity where you haven't paid. That can again bring a claim for money. And from my experience of debt advice, I have noticed that they have done just that. So the question is, what is the process? So yes, once a bailiff has been instructed by a creditor, a relevant creditor, then they will serve you with a notice. So when the bailiff company obtains your case, they will write to you and say, we have been instructed by X, Y, and Z to recover such sums. So you'll be receiving a letter then from the agent. And of course, bailiffs are also known as enforcement agents. They will say, oh, we are approaching you for money. in relation to X, Y, and Z. And you have 7 days to get in touch with us. And of course, if you don't get in touch with them within 7 days, then afterwards, bailiff can attend your home once they've given you a valid notice. So, so the question is, what should you have in that notice? So, in that notice, you should have the following. You should have your correct name, your correct address, the correct amount, and explained that the notice has been served and they are going to be there after 7 days, and of course, once bailiffs do attend, you are expecting charges to be included as part of the original debt. And that's, I'm afraid, is inevitable. And they're allowed to do that, and they're entitled to do that. And law and rules allows them to do just that. So, I mean, what sort of defenses can you have? And of course, you can argue one of the things is the notice is not valid. So again, you can say, okay, I know I'm not the right person here. You've got the wrong person. So providing proof that you're the wrong person, it's one way, or you've already paid the money and you've got the proof. Yeah. So that's some of the defenses. But of course, now there are other ways that you can actually ease the pressure. In terms of easing the pressure, this kind of boils down to, let's say, your vulnerability. Now, when I mean you being vulnerable, it's more like vulnerable in the context of disability, really. So, for example, let's say if you suffer from mental health, then yes, you can ease the pressure. If you're pregnant, if you have children in the property, or let's say, for example, if you're suffering from bereavement, if someone died, obviously in that scenario, you have to think about ways that bailiff ought to respond. Or, or in some occasions, being unemployed and having no money puts you at a disadvantage. Again, those things would make you vulnerable. But of course, having proof of that, having evidence of that, will show that there is a genuine vulnerability. Now, of course, bailiffs will usually ask for proof, ask for evidence, and if you can provide it, it's great. If you can provide it later, of course, it will work for you. But it is about vulnerability. So now the question then is, how do you work out the bill? So when they say you pay X, Y, and Z, how is the bill worked out? But of course, it pretty much depends upon what kind of bailiffs there are. So if we're dealing with bailiffs, for example, coming from the High Court, then rule for that is slightly different from, let's say, a standard bailiff. So High Court bailiffs are bailiffs, as it says, it's literally got instructions from the High Court. So they have 3-stage process to recovery of sums. And first is, of course, they will charge you £75 in order to comply with the court, £75. And then, of course, you will pay extra when you pay for the debts if it's over 1,500. So they're more like really gets approached if the debts are more than 1,500. So the question is, then how much will they get? So yeah, so you have to bear in mind the initial debt from the courts, which includes court cost, and then we're looking at the case going to bailiff, which will add £75. And once it's gone to bailiff, and then the bailiff comes to your home to enforce the order, for High Court bailiffs, we're talking about a fixed fee, 235 on top of 75 and the original order. So So there we are. So that's what it's going to happen. So let's say, for example, if your debt is 200 and you add 75, that's 275 plus 235. So the debt already becomes more than what it is, more than what you already owe. And that's the reality of enforcement process. In a sense, the debt naturally accumulates instead of easing things. But this is in the context of High Court. But then, if they enter your property and seize good, then for acting that performance, i.e. taking and selling your belongings, they can add further £110. And of course, if the debts are more than 1,500, they can add 7.5% on top of the original cost. So that's in the context of High Court enforcement we're talking about. But of course, there is also a standard recovery process. A standard recovery process is when the debt is, I suppose, below £1,000, 1,500. So then the compliance fee 75 is exactly the same. And then when we're talking about 235 again, and of course, when it comes to taking and selling goods, it would be 110 extra. So that's kind of in the context of really the cost of bailiff's fees. And that you need to bear in mind. And of course, that's in terms of overall enforcement. But what if you are confused whether it's not a bailiff, but it's actually a debt collection company? Then what do you do? And the question is, how do you identify that this is not a bailiff? Yes, you're right. There is a huge difference between a bailiff and a debt collection company. Now, a debt collection company is not a bailiff because debt collection company has been instructed by the original creditor, and it hasn't gone through a court process. For example, let's say you haven't paid your credit card for 3 months, 4 months. As part of that company's policy is to sell the debt to a debt collection company. So when the debt collection company sells the debt to the company, is that company will then approach you to recover it. Now, the second company might even sell the debt to another debt collection company. So it could trickle down and move around, never ending. But again, what it hasn't happened so far is that the case hasn't yet gone to court, unless, of course, the debt collection company decided to go to court, recover the money through the courts, and obtain a counter court judgment. But that debt collection company worked on behalf of the original creditor, has the right to recover the money as an agent because the original creditor instructed the debt collection company to do it. That's very different from bailiff, who has been instructed by the courts to do it. But of course, the debt collection company, once the debt collection company has taken it to court, obtained a counter court judgment, and once you instruct a bailiff, it can definitely do that. And of course, many debt collection companies do. Now, in terms of things that you can do in terms of bailiff, so the question is, what can you do when bailiffs do knock on your door? Now, yes, one could be you pay the whole amount if you've got the money. I mean, some people might do. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it if you've got it. Why don't you pay it all off if you think you ought to pay, and then get over and done with? Obviously, if there are disputes, then of course you need to think about ways to deal with it through dispute resolution. You can apply to set aside the enforcement if you think there is a genuine case to answer, depending upon what your case is, i.e., you're not the person you should be approached, or it's not your debt, or they made a mistake. All those things. There are defenses. I suggest you seek advice. Now, the other option is what I usually advise as a debt advisor, is that when bailiffs do attend your home, do bear in mind that they are approaching a resident and a person who lives in a residential property. So therefore, you don't need to open the door. The moment you open the door and you allow them in, you have given them the permission to enter. And if you don't let them in, they can't forcefully enter. They can only do that once they've already entered the property with your permission. And then they can seize goods. But if they initially have not entered your property, there is no right for them to enter the property, unless in extreme scenarios, of course. But when it comes to money and civil enforcement, no. That's why you probably will see that they usually hang around outside the building, not going in, until they find you and knock on your door. And when you let them in, they will start counting things to see what's in the property that is of value that they can take, in order, again, to recover the money. In case you forget, the sole purpose for them to attend is to recover the money that you owe. So it is all about money. If they take things from your property, it's because they want the money. If they sell the goods, again, it's because they want to recover the money. Bailiffs are only interested in money. So yes, so we've talked also about bailiffs in the sense of what you should be doing. Yes, if you can, don't open the door. I advise you not to open the door, because the moment you enter the property, you're kind of giving them permission to enter, and of course they will try to seize things, goods, to recover the money that is due to the original creditor. And no doubt the bailiff will also add fees, which they can do since they're recovering. So in the end, listeners, I have covered the how to be self-employed, and when you are self-employed, what rights and responsibilities do you have as being self-employed. And we had James Farrar talking about what it's like being self-employed. We've also now covered the importance of dealing with bailiffs and what your rights and obligations when it comes to dealing with bailiff. But let's move to something more slightly upbeat. Of course, in terms of upbeat, we are talking about tips of the week. Tips of the week in the context of money. So money, and now of course we're talking about summer. When it's summer, we always think about holidays. Either you want to go locally, or you want to go overseas to France, Germany, Italy, wherever it may be. The question is, what rights do you have when you are going for a holiday break? Now, let's say, for example, what are you entitled to when things do go wrong, especially when you buy a package holiday? So if you are getting a package holiday, you are legally entitled to compensation if the holiday you went on was lower in value than the one you booked. For example, you paid for a deluxe room, but you only got a standard room. This is called loss of value, and you can claim back the difference in value. If you had to spend extra money because of a problem with the holiday, for example, you had to pay for another hotel because there were fewer beds than you booked. This is called claim for out-of-pocket expenses. Some things go wrong that causes you distress or disappointment. In this case, you can also claim for loss of enjoyment. Now, that's when you get a package holiday where you bought one thing but you end up getting something else. But what happens when flights are delayed, what rights do you have then? Here are my tips. If your flight was delayed for more than 2 hours, your airline have to give you the following. Your airline has to give you food and drink. Your airline has to give you access to phone calls and emails. Your airline, if it's delayed overnight, your airline has to provide accommodation. And the journey between the airport and the hotel, if it's delayed, but it's no fault of yours, but it's the fault of airlines. However, if it's caused by a strike or no fault of theirs, then it might not be the case. But what happens if it's more than 2 hours? Again, food and drinks, phone calls, accommodation you are also entitled to, and of course you're also entitled to a reasonable expense. So yes, don't forget, the secret words are you are entitled to reasonable expense. But again, you won't get compensation if it was delayed because of bad weather or, of course, strike. So yes, so here we are. So we are nearly coming to an end. So we are now talking about the amount of compensation you're entitled to. That pretty much depends upon the distance of the flight. So you can check online and Google a WebFlyer website, which will give you information on the amount of compensation you're entitled to. And of course, it also matters in the sense of the length of the delay. If it's late more than 6 hours, 7 hours, that's slightly different from being late, let's say, for 2.5 hours. So you need to bear in mind, the buzzword again is what is reasonable. And if you're an EU citizen, your right is very different compared to a non-EU. So there we are. So this is what we have. So the topic that we have covered is bailiff enforcement, self-employment, and things to watch out for when you're on holiday, when things do go wrong. So next show you will have shortly. In the future, if you want to get in touch with me, you can contact me on Ripon, RIPONSRAY, Ripon S Ray on Twitter. You can also Facebook me, Ripon Ray. And if you want to get in touch with me on Better Bangla, feel free to call the office 0207 790 7970. Of course, when I'm on studio, is 0207 791 5170. Now, if you want to talk to me in the future about relevant topics, feel free to do so. I'm happy to find out what really interests you. I've covered all sorts. I've covered topics related with consumer credit. I've covered Sharia banking. I've also covered bailiff numerous times. I've also covered topics related to self-employed and also benefit advice. Now, next week, we are going to have rent arrears. And if you want to kind of have a conversation about it, 0207 791 5170. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I shall leave you and I'll go. So thank you for listening to Your Money Matters. You're with Ripon, right? This is a weekly show. And yes, thank you.